Hello again. Before going any further, I will at once admit openly to being very old-fashioned in many ways, not least when it comes to women. I believe that men should watch out for women, protect them when possible, carry heavy suitcases for them, open doors and offer them seats on buses and trains. I regard men who mistreat or abuse women, wife beaters and rapists for instance, as being utterly contemptible, the lowest form of life imaginable. I think that it is the duty of every man to stand up for women, and I always saw it as my role in the family to provide for my wife and child. I think that being a real man entails taking care of one's children and making sure they have enough to eat and so on. Caring for family is to me more of the mark of a man than punching people or shooting bears or something. I've given this brief account not because I think that I'm a remarkable specimen of manhood or anything of the kind, but because all the things which I mentioned were once simply taken for granted, and men who behaved in that way were seen as normal fellows who were behaving correctly. It is how men were at one time expected to conduct themselves. Then came feminism, and all these old ways were thrown out of the window. Holding the door open for a woman or offering her your seat was suddenly treated as a sinister means of upholding the patriarchy or oppressing women. Everything was turned on its head, and protecting women and looking after their interests became at best patronising and offensive, and at worst creepy and perhaps a prelude to abuse. This was bad enough, but worse was to come because attitudes towards traditional male qualities, such as not showing one's feelings and keeping things in, became put into a category called toxic masculinity. Weirdly enough, the expression itself was actually devised by men from the so-called men's movement in America in the 1980s. These people claimed that the habit of many men of keeping their feelings in check was a bad sign. Self-reliance and emotional repression, it was suggested, correlated with psychological problems in men, such as depression, stress, substance use disorders, and a tendency to mistreat women. Self-reliance, standing up for oneself and avoiding signs of weakness, in other words, coping with life in a traditionally male way, are the features of toxic masculinity. These go hand in hand with traditional ideas about gender roles. In other words, feeling that one must look after and protect one's family, and the idea that this is a man's task, is a classic example of toxic masculinity. This means that much of what used to be called manliness is now viewed with great suspicion by many progressive men and women. Unless a man blubs in front of others and avoids treating women with special reverence, he will be open to accusations of displaying toxic masculinity. Boys fighting in the playground? Whoa, more toxic masculinity. One minute they're carrying on like that, and the next thing you know, they'll grow up to be the kind of guys who beat up on their wives. This is supremely ironic because if there was one fixed and immutable rule which every boy learned, it was that one never hit a girl. This was the very height of unmanliness, and any boy who struck a girl would be regarded with scorn and dislike by other boys. As men, it was felt that if one saw a woman in trouble or being ill-treated, that it was permissible and sometimes even a duty to step in and to protect her. Wife beaters and rapists were seen as the absolute lowest form of anything. It's strange that this kind of mindset is now seen as undesirable and offensive to women, when in fact it is the very opposite. Some of the manifestations of what is supposedly a new and more acceptable attitude to gender, typified by men dressing up as women and demanding access to women's private spaces, does not seem to me a brilliant way of showing respect and consideration for women. I think perhaps that I will continue with my own customs in this matter, no matter how outdated they may be.